It's the start of another reading vlog, another reading week, and it's week 2, the first full week, but week 2 of the Newts as well. So let's get into what I've been reading. I have actually finished a book today, earlier today, so I will talk about that one at the end. But as for my current reads, I am on audio reading Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. It's a very long audiobook. I think it's about 45-ish hours, something like that. So I don't know if this is necessarily going to be one of my Newts. Hopefully, if I can finish it, it will count for one of my Newt prompts. I think it's History of Magic. Outstanding. History reader favourite. So if I finish it this month, then this will count for that. But I've picked it up and I'm enjoying it. I've barely started it, so I'll talk about how much I've read at the end of this vlog, because really as of right now I virtually haven't read any of it. And ditto to my other current read, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which I'm a little bit nervous about because there's just so much hype surrounding this book and that scares me a little bit. It's also pretty chunky, which doesn't bother me in terms of books, but does just worry me in terms of my Newt's progress. But this is my next read, this is what I've picked up, and I am looking forward to reading it. It follows the life story of a man named Kvothe, which he is telling to somebody, so it's all from his perspective. And I think in this book we start off quite early in his life, so he's a child, and I believe that there's a magic school setting, and that's about all I know. I think it's one of those books that really you want to know as little as possible going into it, and when most people talk about it they don't really talk about the plot all too much, which supports that theory. This one is a sequel, so I can't tell you what it's about. It is the third in an epic fantasy series, which will eventually be 10 books, but so far it's 3. And we follow a cast of characters as they deal with various trials in their lives. And again, I don't really want to get too much into the plot of it. Mostly because you've probably heard me say it 100 times before. Let me just grab the book that I finished earlier. And here's one I made earlier. Any people in the UK who grew up watching Blue Peter will know what I mean, and everyone else will think I'm crazy. That's cool. This is Romanov by Nadine Brands, and I finished this, like I said, earlier today, and I really loved this. It's essentially a historical fiction novel, so I didn't expect to love it. I thought that it was going to be more fantastical than it was. It actually was a lot more historical fiction-esque than anticipated, but I really liked it. I think part of that is the fact that it's history that I'm not particularly familiar with. It's Russian history and Romanov history, which I don't really know anything about other than what's included in the Disney film Anastasia, which is not historically accurate at all. This book is much more historically accurate. The author really helpfully includes an author's note at the end, which sets out the parts that are based in fact and the parts that are based in fiction for the purposes of the storytelling. But essentially the first half, or maybe the first 2/3 of the book, are historically accurate, with a couple of embellishments and changes here and there, but for the most part it's historically accurate. And then it's just the latter part of the story that tells what the author imagines happened next, because history doesn't necessarily know for sure what happened. So it was really unexpected for me because, like I say, I don't usually like historical fiction, but I really enjoyed this, and it was very sad and it was very bleak, and I mean, I enjoyed it as much as anybody can enjoy anything that reveals the absolute atrocities that humans can put each other through. And It reads, I don't know, if you've read or tried to read Anne Frank's diary. I tried to read that when I was younger and I just couldn't get through it. It was just too upsetting. But it's kind of got that similar vibe. It's not quite as intense because it is still a work of fiction, even though it's based in fact, it is a work of fiction. Whereas Anne Frank's diary is, of course, her actual diary, so it's non-fiction. This is fiction, so it was able to paint some light between the shadows, but I really recommend it. It's not very long, it's only 328 pages, and I think it's well worth a read because it was very, very interesting and enlightening, and I feel like I really learnt a lot reading this book, as well as getting an interesting story from it as well. So I gave this 4 stars and I really, really enjoyed it. Highly, highly recommend. So that's where I'm at right now. In terms of my reading plans for the rest of the week, like I said, it's newts at the moment, so let's have a look what's up next. So instead of doing subjects, so doing one whole subject and then another whole subject, I'm going in levels. So I've done all of my A levels, the acceptable levels, so I've done Ancient Rooms, Defense Against the Dark Arts, which Romanov was, and History of Magic. I have got Charms on the list as well, but that's for my additional qualification if I get there. So I am going to just sit Charms in one go at the end if I can. So this week my focus is going to be on Exceeds Expectations, and Name of the Wind is the Defense Against the Dark Arts book. I really hope that I will finish this because I have not got any plans this weekend, so hopefully I'll be able to get a decent chunk of it done at the weekend. It's 600 and something pages, and on a weekend where I do nothing but read, I can read 400 pages, so it's possible. And then for the other books, for Exceeds Expectations, if I get to them, I have The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Let me grab it. Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which would be my History of Magic read, and I have American Royals, which is by Catherine McGee, which would be my Ancient Runes read. So those are the reading plans for this week, but honestly, if I just finish this, I'll be happy because it's a big book and it's been on my list for a long time and I'm nervous about it, and having already started it, I know that the author has a very lyrical writing style, which is not something I'm usually too great with, so I am half tempted to grab the audiobook and read that alongside to see if that helps. So I'm going to try and read like a chapter or two before I make that decision, but that could be what I do. We shall see. Okay, so end of the week check-in. Apologies for my wet hair. This was the only time that I was going to be able to finish this video today. Let's jump into what I have read. So, progress on Oathbringer, which of course I have not finished. I am on page 266. So I've read this portion and I have this massive portion left to read. I'm not going to go into what it's about because it's the Stormlight Archive. I've bored you enough with that already, I'm sure. Am I enjoying it? Actually not as much as I did the first time on this one, oddly, but I think that that's because mild spoilers, I'll put on the screen mild spoilers for Stormlight. This book in the Stormlight Archive follows Dalinar's backstory, and I'm not keen on, I don't think I'm supposed to be keen on who Dalinar used to be. He's not a particularly likeable character in his early years, so I think that's why I'm not enjoying it, because it's not that I'm not enjoying the book, it's that I'm not enjoying Dalinar being the way that he is in that section of the book. But that doesn't go on forever, so it's fine. I also finished The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is 662 pages long, and it's the first book in the King Killer Chronicles trilogy. I actually managed to get this signed at the weekend by Patrick Rothfuss. He did a signing at Forbidden Planet on Shaftesbury Avenue in London, so that was really fun. I went to that and got this signed. I also picked up The Wise Man's Fear, which is book 2, and got that signed as well. Book 3 does not exist yet, but hopefully it will. There's some sort of rumour going around on Amazon and Book Depository that it's going to be out in August of next year. So I don't know if that's true. I probably should have asked him. I didn't. We'll see. But I enjoyed this, actually. I actually read and listened to this in the end. I said, I think, that I might end up doing that, and I was enjoying reading it, but it was quite slow going, and because I'm on a bit of a time crunch because of the newts, I decided to help myself read it a bit quicker by getting the audiobook, and I'm actually super glad that I did, because the audiobook was absolutely fantastic. The narrator's name, I think, is it Roger Degar or Rupert Degar? Rupert Degar. And he was amazing. His narration was absolutely amazing, and I would highly recommend the audiobook or anything narrated by him, actually, to be honest, because I was seriously impressed. This follows a character's life story, and it's pretty sad. It's actually not as meandering as I was expecting it to be, but it does still follow slightly a travelling story type progression of the plot, because, you know, the character encounters something and deals with it, and then encounters something and then deals with it, and then encounters something and deals with it. So it's got that kind of travelling vibe about it, although there isn't actually much actual travelling. I liked the character of Kvothe. He is definitely, I mean, he's the protagonist and he's definitely the main focus of the book. There are some side characters, but they don't get much screen time. But I did like what little we saw of them. There's a little bit of a romantic element to some of this book. It's not a primary point of the narrative, but it is in there, and actually I wasn't overly keen on it. I feel like we could have done quite well without that, and it felt a little bit like a distraction from everything else that was going on in Kvothe's life. And although it's realistic, I mean, during this book Kvothe goes from the age of about 10 to about maybe 16, and so I mean it's realistic for a boy of 15, 16 to have an interest in a girl. I mean, it's realistic for that to be a part of the plot, but I don't know that it necessarily needed to be in there. I would have enjoyed it just as much, if not more. And that's unusual for me, because I actually don't mind romantic storylines in books, but it just felt a little bit distracting in this one. But I did enjoy it, and I definitely will be reading book 2. And then my current read is The Wizards of Once, Twice Magic, which is book 2 to The Wizards of Once, which I read earlier this year, I believe, and really enjoyed. When I read book 1, I was really impressed by the themes that were dealt with. So themes of death and deception and friendship and that kind of thing in a children's book, and they weren't shied away from. They were just dealt with in a really positive way that I found really refreshing for children's literature. But this one is not as deep, and I'm not enjoying it as much. I'm on page 198 of 458, and I'm not enjoying it as much as book 1. I'm not particularly invested in the story. One of the characters was a little bit insufferable in book 1, and they're supposed to be, but they're even more insufferable in book 2, and I don't feel like there are quite so many redeeming features about them in this one so far. So far they're just annoying me in their ridiculous decision making, which I get that they're a child, but still, did they not learn anything from everything that happened in book one? Apparently not. So not particularly enjoying this one, unfortunately, but it is a read for Newts, so I do need to finish it. And it's only a middle grade book, so although it's got a lot of pages left, it shouldn't take me that long to read it. I mean, book one I read in a day because I really enjoyed it, and so I just read it. But this one, I keep wanting to put it down, and then once it's down, I don't particularly want to pick it back up again, apart from the fact that I need to read it. So that's unfortunate. Maybe I'll pick up my next Newts read, which is The Cruel Prince, and just dip in and out of this one. But the trouble is, when I start doing that, I just end up DNFing it and not actually picking it back up again. And because I need this one for the Newts, I feel like I should just get on and read it. And when I say I need this one, it's because it's the only book on my shelves that I've been able to find that is in the past tense. Originally I had planned to read American Royals by Catherine McGee, and that one's actually not in past tense after all, so I had to scour my bookshelves to try and find one that was. Probably a lot of my fantasies are written in past tense, but I just read this one. I'm also currently reading this one, and my next one is a fantasy as well, so I wanted to try and not read only fantasy, although I probably should. So I mean, this is technically fantasy as well, but it's also a children's book, so I figured I'd be able to get through it quickly, but apparently that's not working out. But anyway, that's my reading for this week. We'll see how next week goes. What have you been reading? Have you been disappointed by anything recently? Have you been surprised by anything recently? What's been your favourite thing that you've read recently? You know the drill. I like having a conversation with you in the comments. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks! Bye!